Should I put on my law voice?
Good afternoon, everybody. I think we're going to go ahead and get started. Thanks for coming to the session this afternoon. This is Connecting Learners and Museums Through Educational Metadata Initiatives. My name is Darren Milligan. I'm the Senior Digital Strategist at an office at the Smithsonian Institution called the Center for Learning and Digital Access. And I'm joined here with my colleagues, Melissa Wadman, who's the Manager of Program Evaluation, and James Collins, the Digital Media Project Manager. So I wanted to start this morning with a little introduction to someone that many of you might know, Richard Culotta, who's the Director of the Office of Educational Technology for the U.S. Department of Education. And he gave a talk a little while ago that I thought was kind of a good introduction to some of the things we're going to talk about today. And he identified some specific problems in the structure of traditional education that technology is really uniquely positioned to address. And these are things like the treatment of all learners with a similar style or a similar pedagogy, homogeneous scheduling, the latency of performance indicators, things like that are widely identified issues with traditional classroom education, and things that technology perhaps has an opportunity to address and to have some impact. I think it's kind of important to sort of put some things in context. We're going to talk, this is a how-to session, so I think we want to keep things kind of informal and kind of keep it open if people have questions or need us to slow down or pick up the pace. But, I think it's important to sort of make sure that we have some context for the ways that digital technology can really address issues. And, the reason that these couple of things we're going to talk about today exist, because, technology can really have an impact in things, especially in things that are connected to museums and museum resources. So technology is really uniquely positioned to radically improve access to learning resources. And these resources are really essential components to enabling personalized learning, which has kind of become a bit of a buzzword in education, but something that people are really looking into, and something that we feel has some potential to have some impact. So we're going to be talking about two promising strategies that help address this need specifically. So a little overview of what we're going to do. So we're going to do kind of talk at you for maybe the first half today, for the first 30 minutes or so, and take a look at some of these things here. And then the second half, we're going to actually walk through developing some metadata for some educational resources. So we picked one that we have that we're going to walk through up here, but if you haven't come with one in mind, maybe be thinking about an educational resource that's available on your museum site, and we'll walk through a process for looking at how to address metadata for that in the second half. So, all right. So I have a couple slides here with some data, and what they really show are that really more than ever, which is probably not a surprise, teachers are using the internet to inform and support and enhance and really even enable their teaching. So this is some data from a Pew study that was done last year, looking at advanced placement and National Writing Project teachers, really demonstrating that clearly teachers are not any different than most of us. They're using the internet to find resources to enhance their teaching or to enable their teaching entirely. And then, in the same study, teachers really felt that their students are having a hard time as well, as they may be having, in really isolating and identifying the right content. A similar survey that was done, by the organization that we're going to be talking a little bit more about today, LRMI, found very similar things. This was a bit of a wider survey than the Pew study. Looked at a pretty wide group of teachers in K through 6, and clearly teachers are using this content, but they're really having some difficulty in really identifying the content that they need right now for the classroom. Obviously the internet's really impacting the way the teachers and their students are accessing information, and so the question I guess at this conference is how is that impacting museums, or what are museums doing to address that? So we thought we'd sort of take a look at the institution that we all come from, the Smithsonian, which is our sort of tagline is usually the world's largest museum and research complex, and so the Smithsonian's been around since 1846. And it's really a collection of museums. So we have 19 museums and galleries, 9 major international research centers, the National Zoo, a nationwide network of more than 180 affiliated museums, and a collection of programmatic offices that focus on strategic initiatives like the office that we work for. And since 1846, the Smithsonian's been growing in size, adding buildings, but really also growing in its visitation, both physically and digitally. So this is actually the Smithsonian's first homepage. This is from 1995. Yeah, total Netscape, classic kind of look. But, actually kind of pretty complete for an early, it's not just what are our hours. You've got activities there and resources. And so sort of looking at 1995, in the Smithsonian in that year and the museums that existed in 95, which are not as many as we had then, we had just over 23 million non-digital visits to the museum, and just not even 100,000 digital visits. So if we jump forward, then so that's about 3%. The digital was about 3% of the physical or the non-digital. Jumping ahead to last year. Obviously, those numbers changed quite a bit. So 30 million non-digital visits, but 140 million digital visits to the Smithsonian museums. So if we sort of kind of do a little bit of math there, we see that, the physical visitation increased by about 27%, and the digital visitation increased by 191,833%. Which, you can argue that this is to be expected, right? I mean, we've all seen the global massive expansions. The reason this conference exists, the reason that many of us do what we do, the use of digital tools and the expectation of people of all ages to access rich digital content. Linda Kelly, who many of you might know, often says, museums now really operate in three spaces. There's the traditional physical space of the museum floor. There's online and fixed web and places, like websites and social media, and then most recently in mobile spaces, mobile apps and sites. So this is just a bit of an overview of sort of what we just saw here from 95 to 2013, looking at the growth of global population using the internet, both globally and in the developed world, and sort of comparing that to how the physical visitation to the museum, I think, is really leveled off. I mean, I think many museums are serving, especially large museums like the Smithsonian museums, are serving about as many visitors to the museum that they can handle. We sort of leveled off at a point, unless we continue to add museums, we're at a point where that's full. And so I think this demonstrated to us, and one of the reasons that an office like ours exists is to begin to address what does a museum complex like the Smithsonian do to confront this reality. So what's that?
Hi everybody. So I'm curious. Is everyone finding the same thing at their institutions in terms of physical, or non-digital versus digital visits? Yes? No?
Maybe not 6%,
but you would agree with that?
Right.
Okay, that finding.
Mm-hmm.
So we're here to talk about, so what do we do to help educators find all this great stuff that we have in terms of educational resources? In the survey that Darren mentioned, I'm sorry, I can do the slides if you want. Okay. Educators reported that what they need most in terms of search results are relevant content, appropriate grade level information, detailed information on the types of resources that are offered, who the resource was made for originally, and rights and copyright information, especially in terms of classroom use. A lot of the teachers wanted to know that. So,
Next one?
Yep. I'm sorry, I can do the,
okay.
If you
want
think,
this?
it'll make it easier. We think that metadata is the answer to this, and metadata, as we all know, is the information attached to the digital resource to help people find, analyze, and we hope to ultimately use the resource. And in the current environment, educators get all sorts of results when they search. I mean, this is just a display of Smithsonian-only resources that they could possibly find in educational-related websites. So on the Smithsonian's education.org, the site that our office hosts, educators, when they search for resources, this is what they find: a mix of metadata about the resource, including the title, the description, state standards, as well as some paradata. And I'm curious, how many people are familiar with the term paradata? So not many. So okay, so paradata was created, who coined that term?
Who did it? It was the Learning Registry folks, but...
We think Department of Ed Learning Registry. Means user-generated information, so things like ratings, comments, reviews, to help people analyze the resources as well. And I think it's worth noting here that the original model for tagging resources, I think especially for museums, was to align them to as many standards as possible to give broad descriptions so that they could just be applicable to more. And now this is sort of, with the emphasis on customization and personalization of learning, the focus is now to be more targeted and more precise in the tagging for these resources to make them more useful to the educators. Currently, the industry standard for tagging online content is called schema.org and was created by Google, Bing, and Yahoo to provide a consistent markup schema for general online content. And specialized communities have been encouraged to extend it to meet their own needs. And yeah, this just gives you a sense of all that's included in schema.org. And out of this, the Learning Resource Metadata Initiative emerged from a partnership between the Association of Educational Publishers and the Creative for educational resources specifically. It was accepted and published into the schema.org in May of last year. So once LRMI metadata is embedded within a resource page, search engines can hopefully, recognize learning resources much more easily and with more accuracy. And these are the properties of LRMI, and they include things like what was reported in that survey, things that were important to educators, the time required to complete an activity, defining the educational use, the age range it's appropriate for, the type of resource it is, and again, the rights and copyright information, et cetera. I'm not going to read through all of them, but and included here, we've also have, though, the accessibility metadata properties, and they're not part of LRMI, but we are embarking on a project where we're also including tags for the accessibility. It's another schema that's been adopted by schema.org, right? And we'll be telling you about that project shortly. And I will hand it over to James.
I'm going to stand up here for my part. Okay, so we talked about why we're moving in that direction, and we also talked about LRMI a little bit. Basically, this is the life cycle that we anticipate. This is what we're working with here. So we have the publisher's aspect, which is, I think this has a laser. Which button is it?
Right above the right mouse, there's a button that you can't see almost. Just right above the right mouse. There you go.
Okay. All right, so this is where you all are, right? These little circles represent all the learning resources that you create. Maybe they're lesson plans, maybe they're videos, things like that. And you make all these things, and they're great, and they're really good, and you bring people to your museums, and you show them to them, and they say, hey, those are great. We're talking, the LRMI focus of that is really this arrow here. So we're talking about tagging it so that we can make it more, can you all hear me? Do I need to use a microphone?
It's a recording station.
Oh, sorry. Wasn't aware of that. Okay, so the metadata aspect of it is to find everything and make it, to make everything more findable, right? To have some sort of consistency for that data so that when we're talking about things, we're using the same language, and that interfaces with machines really well, because if you know anything about computers, you got to talk to them in the same manner. If you keep changing your words, they get confused. So then some magic happens here, and then we get to the lessons part over here. So somewhere in between here, it magically ends up in classrooms across the nation. It ends up in other museums all over the place. We're seeing all the good work that we have doing good out in the world. So yeah, so this is the LRMI part. And what I'm going to be talking about here is the learning registry part, which is kind of this, I like to think of it as this inverse triangle here. And then the interfaces that tap into the learning registry. So the learning registry sounds really complicated, really scary, and if you look it up, it doesn't make a lot of sense, but I'm going to tell you what it is right now so you can just keep it in your minds. It's just a repository of learning resource metadata. That's it. And these are stored in what's called nodes, but you can think of those as just servers. And really, it's no different from the internet at large, except that it specifically focuses on learning resource metadata. So let's walk through this a little bit with like a specific learning resource. So this is the National Zoo's website, and it's a video about watch fishing cats fish. So you can see we've got the people who published this, we've got the video, and we've got a little bit of text. This is not findable right now. You can find it on the National Zoo website. You can find it if you're looking for fishing cat videos. But most science teachers aren't going to say, you know, I think we should really have a class on fishing cats, and so let me try and find something related to fishing cats. But there's a lot of text and there's a lot of good content in here that you might want to use in a biology class or if you want to talk about predator-prey or ecosystems. So how do we distill that out so that people can actually find it? So this is a picture of the Learning Registry. It's a network diagram, which are usually not very fun to look at, but you can learn a lot from it. So what we have is these little green boxes are producers. Again, that's you. Those are the museums. We have the blue boxes. Those are consumers. So in our office, a lot of times that's K-12 schools. For you, it might be visitors who go back home. It might be other museums. Oops. Then we have these nodes here, the common nodes. Those are just the actual repositories. And then there's also red nodes, and those are gateways. And the gateway nodes, you don't need to worry about at all unless CIO or whatever tech office you have makes you. Those are just kind of an additional barrier so that you can maintain the common node on your intranet and then use the gateway node to connect to other networks. But the great thing about the Learning Registry is that okay, let's just walk through this, all right? So you have your fishing cat video, and it's over here. And again, it's great. You put it on your TV in your exhibit, and everything's great. Everybody loves it. You want to share it with people, right? So maybe you upload it to, in our case, the Smithsonian node. So once it's on the Smithsonian node, it can go over here to Smithsonian users and anybody who's accessing a Smithsonian website, which is great. We get a lot of hits, as we just showed, but we would like even more of that. You shouldn't have to come to the Smithsonian's website to see a Smithsonian video. So what the Learning Registry does is it takes this resource and it replicates it out to other nodes. And those nodes then replicate it out to even more nodes. And then if we say that this is the Department of Education's node, which we'll talk about in a second, that taps into every other node, pretty much, then we can see that everything is spread everywhere. And really what that means for us is that this user in California who might not be thinking about fishing cats, might not be thinking about the Smithsonian, but they need something that's biology related, and they go to their California Department of Education website, and hey, what do you know, this is something that comes up for them. So that's the power of the Learning Registry. Now you might have a few questions about the technical aspect of this. There are a lot of technical details in our paper if you want to look that up, and you can also contact me, email, tweet, whatever. But you'll notice here that there's two networks here. These are open networks. That's why they're sharing information in between. This is a closed network over here. You'll notice that the fishing cat does not go over here. The Learning Registry, which is really just an Ubuntu installation with a Perl script, a small Perl script running on it, is flexible enough that you can do a lot of different things with it. And it was actually originally a joint project between the Department of Education and the Department of Defense. So you can imagine why the Department of Defense might want to work in something here that they don't have to share everything that they do out to everybody else, right? Everybody doesn't need to see our Army manuals. So, so you can keep it closed like that. You can make it one way so that it pushes out. You can make it two ways so that it pushes back and forth. I mentioned the Department of Education node. So they were the other half of this project. And their node is, even though this is a decentralized network, the Department of Education node is essentially a central hub. So anything that goes into the Department of Education node pretty much pushes back out to everywhere else. And if you access the Department of Education node, you pretty much have everything that's in the Learning Registry. So if you want if there's one thing to take away from this about the Learning Registry, it's that you should look at the Department of Education's node before going anywhere else. Okay, so big success, right? Fishing cat video is everywhere. And this is the part where you might be saying, hey, this is amazing. And it's also where I'd like to say that this is a very nascent technology. So the Department of Education is doing this. And there are there are two interfaces that I'll show you that are really good, but a lot of other people are just figuring it out right now. So I would say that there's a low bar to participating in the Learning Registry, but don't start hyping it up at your museum and say, hey, guess what? You know, we're going to be all over the world with just this one quick trick. But yeah, so this is the Brokers of Expertise website. They pull directly from the Department of Education's node, as far as I understand. And this is California Department of Education. So again, you can see here the metadata that we were talking about, the LRMI data, showing up here. We have the title, we have the submitters, conditions of use, description, and we have a screenshot of that. So all of this metadata is stored in it's stored in the node itself in the Learning Registry. Obviously, the picture is not, and this is not. We'll talk about this in a second. But it pulls all that data. So then we see over here in the Open Educational Resources, which is the Illinois Shared Learning Environment, we see all of the same information showing up here. So that's it. You publish to the Learning Registries, the Department of Education's Learning Registry node, and bam, it shows up on these pages. Not bad. Okay, so that's the metadata aspect of it. That's LRMI, that's schema.org adopted, and it's pretty set in place. There's another part of this called Paradata, which Melissa talked about briefly. We love getting this, distributing this out, but we would also like to know what that user in California is doing with that data. If you're going to send this all out, we should get something back maybe. And that's Paradata. So that's usage data, but it's also very fine-grained activity data that we can collect. So it's not just accesses and bookmarks and favorites and full views, but it's also what did they do with it. And all of that, the dream of Paradata is that all of that will travel this little route, replicating back and forth across these nodes until it gets all the way back up to us here. Okay, so Paradata, if the Learning Registry is nascent, then Paradata is still kind of incubating. There aren't a lot of implementations out on that. So that's kind of scary on one hand, but it's also really exciting on the other hand because there's a lot that can be done with it right now. So you can see here, this is not pulling from the Learning Registry, but it will be in the future. Views, full accesses. So instead of aggregating that across multiple sites, imagine if you could just pull one number from the Learning Registry and that would tell you where it's being, how many times it's been accessed from everywhere. Pretty useful. But even more interesting is this fine-grained detail that we can get down here. So you can see the example. Incorporated into a lesson plan by an educator of college adult education. It can actually get that, that's so flexible, it can actually get that level of fine-grained detail. People just aren't uploading that data yet. So if you're interested in this and you have a technical background, I would say get on the developers forum, which is on Google right now. It's just Learning Registry Google group for developers. Because they're trying to figure this out and find the best way to make it more common for everybody else. Now, for the rest of you, you're probably just like, well, I want to dip my toes in this, but I don't really want to, start a huge project. This is going to be your best bet. This is Easy Publish. It's a GitHub repository, so you can fork it and make your own modifications to it. It was developed by Jim Clow. I think it was part of like a hackathon for them. And here's the address for that. And I believe we'll be sharing the slides, so you can check that out. This should look pretty familiar. Here are all your LRMI fields up here. And here's so this is for a single resource. And then here is an import data section. You can actually type in all of your LRMI data into a spreadsheet and just drop it in there, press a button, and bam, up in the Department of Education's node. So how long is this going to take you? Probably not that long. Maybe a day, a week, depending on your technical expertise and how many resources you have. Now there is one tricky part to this, and that's the credentials box up here. You do need a PGP or a GPG authentication, and you need to get that account registered with the Department of Education. So if that doesn't make any sense to you, there are some more details in the paper about that, and again, it's a really active Learning Registry community, so if you ask around there, people are really friendly about helping you out. So yeah, that's pretty much it. We'll talk a little bit more about our specific example. And again, if you have questions about some of the nitty-gritty about this sort of stuff, we're happy to field that afterwards. But we understand most of the people here aren't like hardcore developers. We're more like, can we do this in a week? And if so, what's the benefit?
So before we sort of dig in and kind of try this all out, we wanted to, I think, share with you from an institutional perspective sort of what the Smithsonian's doing and how we're approaching sort of getting caught up, in a sense, I think, is the way that we're thinking about it. I mean, we've got about 2,500 educational resources from across the museums that have some metadata that Melissa showed, but certainly not complete LRMI metadata, and so we have a project in place that we're sort of, kind of on step one right now, but we're sort of moving through this process, which is to identify the resources that first, warrant having this kind of metadata. So we've got, a huge amount of resources that some are fairly simple and some are incredibly complex. And so from an institutional perspective, I think there's a conversation about how you segment some of the educational content so that this kind of description really makes sense. So we're in that process right now. We're going to be working with sort of a couple routes that you can take to develop this metadata. The one is sort of the simple do-it-yourself method that we're going to show you in a minute here. Because we have so many to get caught up, we're going to be working with a consultant that's going to work with classroom teachers to develop this metadata for all of our existing resources. And kind of once we're caught up, then we're going to be doing sort of the do-it-yourself method that we'll take a look at. So once that metadata is developed, it will be embedded on at least a couple of the websites where those resources exist, and ideally more, given sort of the nature of the Smithsonian. Museums tend to do what they want in return in regards to their website. So we're hoping for full participation across all the Smithsonian Museum sites, but we have a couple picked out that are our partners here, the Museum of American History and then our own site, and we're going to be working with those sites to take a look at what the impact of this process is. So once that metadata is embedded on the site, the pages will be republished. The metadata itself for all of the resources will be released into the Learning Registry. And then we'll take a look at what the impact of that is. And then we're going to make an attempt to sort of change a little bit of the culture, which Melissa will tell you about
Right now.
right now.
I would just like to point out, before I talk about the evaluation of this, is that we are doing this project through an internal grant, and we felt it was very important, and we wanted to get not just catch up with resources, but we wanted to have enough resources tagged so that we'd be able to study what happens, the search, analysis, and use of these resources. And we, as Darren was saying, are working with a partner, the American History Museum, and we're going to be tagging about 2,500 resources in bulk, and then evaluate that. And we're going to use an external evaluator, and we're going to look at the project from some different angles. We're going to be analyzing, obviously, the quantitative data, the web analytics that we can get by tagging all of this content. But we're also going to be working with groups of teachers to replicate the LRMI survey that was sent out that we referred to earlier as it relates to museum resources, so that we can add to that body of knowledge as well. And we're going to take an in-depth look at educators and how they search and analyze the resources, and try to understand if that leads to any difference in use in the classroom or wherever afterwards because of better tagging. And we are also going to be doing a formative evaluation of the professional development opportunities that we're going to be offering through this, which will be, we're going to be hosting in-person workshops for Smithsonian educators, about 4 this summer. And we're also going to create a training video of how to generate this data. Metadata, excuse me. We're going to have virtual tagathons for those who can't get to those in-person workshops, so that we can work through some of this process with them. And we're also going to be publishing an LRMI guide for museums and cultural institutions specifically, because we feel passionate about this, that this is the right way to go. I mean, just today, I saw an email from the LRMI initiative that was saying that they have a new survey out that said that 72% of educational publishers are aware of LRMI, 60% of them tag with metadata already, and over 50% of them who don't tag are planning to start within the year. So we really feel strongly that museums and cultural institutions need to get on board and be a part of this, because all the educational publishers are right now. So if we want educators to use our educational resources, we need to make sure they can find them. So our hope is, with all of this professional development, that it becomes a part of the process in creating educational resources for these museum educators. And I know everyone has like, oh great, another thing for museum educators to have to do. But we really think of it as it's something that can help think through while you're creating. It kind of can function as sort of a logic model formative evaluation as you're tagging, because it makes you think about who are you really creating this whatever it is for, resource for, and how long is it going to take, and what do we really want people to get out of it, et cetera. And that's,
I think that's important to really sort of say. I mean, I think what we're hoping to do is really change the culture a little bit. As you'll see, if you're not a museum educator or the person who produced the resource that you're going to be doing some tagging with, you'll see that it really is much easier to develop this kind of content when the resource itself is being developed by the person who developed it. There's some things about how the resource should be used in the classroom that the person who made it and designed that resource has, in their head or on paper, and often a year later that kind of material tends to maybe not be as available to the webmaster or to the person who might typically be charged with doing this kind of work that seems technical.
And before we get into actually tagging,
Yeah.
I'm just curious, how many people here actually already tag to LRMI with their resources?
Cool.
Great, cool, awesome.
Cool. Great. So, yeah.
Oh, sorry.
I think we're ready to go. So we're going to be using, to do this, a tagger called the InBloom tagger. So the URL is there. It's tagger.inbloom.org. So if you've got a laptop or some device out there, please pull it up, and I'm going to do the same. And we'll, it looks like this here. So this is not by any means the only tagger that's available, and this is a pretty simple user interface that's designed for doing these sort of one at a time, or at least to introduce you to the idea of it. There are a lot more streamlined ways of doing it. Even here, there's a form that you can use in Excel to upload your content in bulk. If you've got this material, or if you've got existing metadata for your resources, you can sort of begin to map that over to the fields that LRMI uses using this field, and do more of a bulk upload into this tool, or into the learning registry. So we thought for today we would pick one of our resources. This is one of the most popular lesson plans that's available from SmithsonianEducation.org. This is a thing that's a few years old. It's 4 or 5 years old. It's a lesson that looks at World War II posters, U.S. World War II posters, and has some activities where the kids do some document analysis, and it's really a kind of a lesson about civic responsibility, sort of on the home front during World War II. So everybody got this up? Anybody who's participating got this up? Yeah? Cool. Okay. So the first step here is to sort of create a new tag. So I'm up here in the left with new. And the interface has, if you paste in your URL and sort of tab through, the interface will pull this up so you can sort of do everything from within the interface. If you guys want to jump in or anything, just,
Yeah.
okay, cool. So I'm just going to kind of do this step by step, but if people have questions or anything, please, this is kind of, I guess, the time to jump in, and I'm just going to kind of walk through this fairly quickly, just so you can sort of see that it's kind of simple, really. Most of the pieces are pretty simple, and then we can have some questions and talk more about this process itself, or the other issues. So, yeah, so there are 3 tags here. There's sort of a general, there are the educational specific fields, and then the standards alignment piece, which is maybe the only difficult piece if you're not the person who created this resource. But kind of walk everybody through here. So this resource is called World War II and the Home Front. We've got a description that exists. Just paste this in, so you see that. The language. And see, many of these fields, which we'll see when we export this, we'll look at the code, are open text fields, and there really aren't standardized vocabularies for most of these. They're fairly open. The fields themselves are standardized through schema.org, but the contents of them can be fairly open.
And there is guidance towards that.
Yeah. And there exists some guidance. These are ones that are generally agreed on, some of these ones where you see, but they're fairly open. If you have resources in other languages, for example, you see English and Spanish are the only 2 offered by this tagger. One here, let's say Melissa made this.
Even though I did.
most likely have a terms of use for your content. LRMI uses a URL for that, but that URL could be to the Creative Commons page or whatever licensing system that you use. Publisher. So is based on URL is kind of an interesting one. This is a way that that schema.org uses to try to connect or try to maintain a history. So if your resources are built upon others, are next steps of others, or I think in the case of this type of resource, we will be using this to link back to the original primary source. So this resource is based, upon the We Can Do It work incentive poster by Westinghouse. So we're going to use that for, is our based on. So then the educational fields are the ones that, if your educator's doing this step while they're creating, this is going to be really, really easy for them. If you're the kind of the web guy, web gal who's doing this, it's going to be a lot more difficult because these are things that the educator really thinks about when developing these kinds of resources, and they're often sort of buried within the resource. So the end user here is a student. This is developed for late middle school to high school. Like I said, again, these are fairly agreed upon vocabularies, but they're not completely fixed. So I'll show you here where we can change these, but this has some presentation, some note-taking. There's an introduction, and there's some hands-on pieces. It's active. So this is an activity. PDF, excuse me. So you can sort of see, when you begin to look at these, you see how really useful these might be for a teacher in a classroom who's looking for a group activity that's about, civic responsibility for ninth graders. If she were to put that into a search engine, she's not going to find this resource. Once this metadata is available, she understands this resource is described specifically for the activity that she's looking for. This is a group activity, a small group activity. And for some reason, this tagger has the ability to put resources that take up to 12 years. I don't know what kind of educational resource might take 12 years, but maybe you have one. So this takes about 2 hours. And the educational alignment, this tagger itself is set up to easily do Common Core. Is everyone more or less familiar with Common Core state standards? Yeah.
Yep.
It doesn't require that you use that. That's the one that most publishers are doing now, just because it's a unified tagger. But certainly there are others that people are doing, like Next Generation Science, things like that. So this is, again, it's a fairly flexible one. But once you've walked through that for a resource, you're given some export fields. We're going to look at HTML just because it's simplest to look at, but you've got CSV and JSON, which would be more used if you were sort of planning on putting this into the learning registry, and the HTML certainly to embed right on this page. You can see here, so this is what we just generated. So here's the metadata that we just walked through in 2 minutes. And this would be then put right into the head tag within that website here to be then re-indexed by the search engines. This also in a different format would then be put either through the Easy Publish interface that James showed, or put up and through some of the other methods to put into the learning registry. So does it seem fairly straightforward?
And that's how easy it is.
Yeah, yeah. So there's some things you can do. I mean, you can do this in bulk. I mean, we're doing a lot of these at once, so we're certainly not going to walk through this for 2,000 resources. We're gonna do it in a spreadsheet so that we can quickly kind of do this. But I think you can see. I mean, this is something that most museum educators we talk to say, yeah, this is this is kind of a no-brainer. It would take me a minute or two or 5 minutes maybe to do when these resources are being developed. You guys wanna- Yeah.
You talked about off the web versus the person who does this not just produce the content,
Right.
or we have a lot of content that's produced by other educators who are not me. So what are some of the skills that you've learned to be able to do that effectively? Or is there some sort of communication? Is it like a questionnaire you ask the educator? Is it something you specifically look for?
I think, you know, we're looking directly to involve the educators in using a tool like this. Because it's not a technical interface, I mean, it was really designed for educators to use. It wasn't, you know, it wasn't designed to, you know, go through and code this directly.
But was your question about past resources that have already been created?
It's
Yeah.
sort of, and then in the it was sort of like, because there's some educators who I know, because this is something that I've had to do when I had to try to teach people, and I have a hard time getting other educators to think this way is actually different than a lot of the things that we do. We don't standardize, we innovate. You know, there's a lot of difference in the field, and then plus we are saddled with hundreds of lesson plans. So I think strategies to try to help people communicate this more organized way.
So, yeah, so that's what we're trying to tackle, but what we're doing is we are outsourcing the bulk tagging to get those 2,500 resources tagged at first, and the reason that we're putting such an emphasis on the professional development, though that's for the museum profession to try to get this to be understood and easily done as they're creating them, to get that buy-in. So there will be a guide and a video that everyone, you know, well, hopefully by the end of the year.
Like think organized. Is there any things?
I mean, I think the main piece of, you know, incentive maybe that we'll have that a big part of this project is the evaluation, is really looking at what happens, you know, from a quantitative perspective. How is this process? Does this process dramatically change the activity on these resources? And then qualitatively to really look at, does it affect the operation that teachers use when they're using Google to find resources they need? And so I think, you know, from a cultural change perspective within our institution, that's going to be our ammunition to say, look, this is a resource without it, and this is a resource with, and, you know, you spent all these resources, this time to create this incredible learning opportunity. Let's do this one more step to ensure that people can find it and can find it quickly. Thank you.
Yes.
Please do. Yeah. Mhm.
I have a whole bunch of questions, so you may want to shut me down.
All right.
Let's see. One set of questions revolves around the open educational resource community, which is struggling at this point to get some sort of central repository. And my question is how OCW connections, Orange Group in Florida, how many of those folks have you scraped the data into your There are hundreds of thousands of resources already out there.
Sure. The Smithsonian right now is not pulling pulling metadata in from non-Smithsonian resources. So we're in a kind of a push stage right now. So we're publishing that metadata in an effort these other places that you're mentioning will harvest that metadata and expose these resources to their users on their platform.
Well, that's what they're saying too. So
Mhm.
we're kind of operating
Yeah.
at cross purposes if both or all of the repositories say, oh, well, we're counting on somebody
Sure.
else
Yeah.
to get the data to us.
Mhm.
And all we want to do is push out the data.
Mhm.
We've
Yeah.
got to get a higher level of collaboration going.
I agree. I mean, I think you'll see the main interfaces that have been built that are using the Learning Registry right now are state departments of education. So, you know, California and Illinois are the two strongest that have pretty robust, you know, systems. So they're the organizations right now that have the resources and have the audience or the need to pull that, and that also aren't.
Everybody has resources, you're wishful thinking.
Well,
No,
you know,
digital
yeah,
educational
yeah,
resources
yeah.
on the brokers of expertise side.
But
That's right.
they have the the need, and they're not at least large publishers of resources, so they want to tap into places like museums that have quality, resources and pull those in. But I agree with you, and we have these conversations internally about once we are really in a good push-pull mode here, why wouldn't we necessarily expose, if someone's at our site, a teacher looking for resources, why would we hide good quality content from other providers that aren't the Smithsonian? I mean, that gets into a lot of conversations about, the role of the museum and why are we advertising or marketing or promoting content that we didn't produce on the platform that we paid to produce. There's a lot of this kind of internal political conversations, I think, that will be happening. I don't see a reason why anyone who's involved in the Learning Registry wouldn't be exposing and pushing, if you've got a user there and they're looking for great content and you're able to expose that to them, why wouldn't you?
Especially the publishers who would love to scrape your sites,
Mm-hmm.
because you've got Creative Commons. Are all of these things Creative Commons?
Smithsonian resources are not Creative Commons tagged.
What's the copyright issue? What's the copyright status of this stuff? If I put my stuff into the registry,
So it's not our registry. So, the Learning Registry works by sharing metadata, and some paradata eventually. So what you're exposing is just the metadata, not the resources themselves. So, the Smithsonian has an interesting problem, I would say, since we're being recorded. I mean, it's an interesting conversation going on about who gets to do with the resources that we have and what they do with them. I mean, we have a blanket usage policy for all of our digital content, more or less, that says educational usage of it is completely open and fine. That's a long way away from Creative Commons or public domain. There are some, there are the issues I think all museums have with this, that there's not a lot of people who are focusing on this, that we have collections that have artwork that have interesting copyright issues with them. We have collections that have donor stipulations that affect resources. Many of these things were developed in a time when this conversation wasn't happening as much, I think, as it is now. Things were in print, and that had an established, mechanism for dealing with these issues, and in a world that seems quite a bit different now. Yeah.
This is less about the collection items and more about the learning resources. This is about taking lesson plans or things that your educators are creating, pushing out the metadata, which Google is already indexing, and making it tight so that search engines can aggregate it properly. It's just about more discoverability for these, not so much about taking our photos from our astronomical observatory and uploading it to some server. This is just aggregated metadata.
Mm-hmm.
We have some for-cost educational resources and free, both behind passwords. I mean, should we even bother with this if Google can't find it?
Do you have, I mean, certainly the people who are using this right now are mostly commercial publishers. Melissa was saying the thing that came out today, I mean, half of commercial publishers are in the process of developing this kind of metadata. And I think in the most cases they have a landing page for their for-profit product that Google can find and that users can find, that then hit a paywall. So are you in a situation where you have some information that is public or accessible?
Yes, but we're just trying to figure out how to tag 800 little
Paragraphs, yeah.
pieces on that main page.
I gotcha. Yeah. Yeah, it's difficult. I mean, the examples I've seen, most publishers are breaking that, so they have a landing page, for lack of a better term, for each of their books or each of their many of them they're tagging non-digital resources, so they're tagging printed publications, textbooks, and lesson plans and things that aren't open or aren't digitally accessible. So they're using it to ensure that people who are buying those kinds of things can find them as well. So there might be some models there to look at.
I think the challenge with that is just when it's so much that if the tagging does bring them to that main page, so they helping the user or the searcher know that they were arrived to the right place.
Mm-hmm.
But what you're saying is there would be a main page for each of those 800?
Yeah, I mean, this sounds more like a site architecture issue than, yeah. Unfortunately, that's the that's the harder thing in some respects. Yeah. Is there a question over here?
So you spoke a little bit about how search engines, if you're embedding this metadata in your content itself, how search engines
Mhm.
work. Can you just speak a little bit more about kind of the current state of what search engines can do with that versus kind of the future potential of, what we're hoping for with that?
Sure.
Potato salad?
Yeah, so Google had a great implementation of this a little while ago that they've since turned off for reasons that they're not explaining. It was always called the potato salad example. So if you were to search Google for potato salad, you'd be presented on the left. So Google would recognize that you were searching for a food-related, it's the food tags for schema.org would recognize that you were looking for food and potentially a recipe. So on the left, you'd have some search filters. So you could filter by ingredient, by preparation time, these sorts of things. So that was actually grabbing that schema.org metadata and allowing you to affect the rank of search results. So they've removed that, which is unfortunate because this would have had a similar, if you had searched for a civic responsibility lesson plan, you would have been presented with the kind of fields that we were just looking at. So it's unclear whether Google is going to be the interface for that or any search engine is going to be the tool for that.
But that's the future potential
Yeah.
of it.
Yeah.
Is that right now, if you search for potato salad, you just get 20 gazillion potato salad recipes, which is the same thing that people get for learning resources. If you search for Abraham Lincoln or whatever, but if you can filter it better, by that metadata, it makes it much more useful.
If you haven't looked at any research on the semantic web, that's really what you just need to, it's the core promise of that, that we're not going to be seeing these AI coming in and indexing sites anytime soon in a smart, intelligent way, so we need to do the dirty work ourselves to enable that technology to come about earlier than it would otherwise.
So I think, looking at the research that focuses on the importance of the metadata is great, but does the research also address the ways, coming from the other angle, is search the best way for us to find it, or what's the best way for teachers to discover?
What would the other options be
Mhm.
besides searching?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I don't know. We could mention like a serendipitous interface too.
Certainly, I mean, yeah.
Practical, but there are options.
Yeah. I mean, you can look at, this site here, SmithsonianEducation.org. I mean, well over half of the search traffic is coming in from search engines, directly to a resource landing page, not people searching for Smithsonian Education and coming to the homepage, but people searching for, civic responsibility lesson plan and arriving, at this page here. So I think there's some indicators just in the basic metrics of how people are arriving at our content that illuminates a little bit of that question. I think too, the reason that the Illinois and the California sites exist is the states are being challenged with offering to, and both of those sites are actually not just a search engine, they're kind of a whole learning management system that has recommended resources sort of tied into that. So some of the states and some of the commercial providers who have, there's many of those who are doing that, are offering a subset of the internet, I guess, of kind of recommended content. And so that behavior certainly is a little different than someone using Google and kind of trying to find their way in. How this affects that, I mean, I think most of those sort of front-end developers, as James was saying, I mean, the Learning Registry is not a front-end access point. It's an infrastructure that enables this metadata to kind of move around easily. And the Department of Ed and Department of Defense have been very upfront saying, we're not building a search portal for education for the world. We're building the pipes, and it's up to the states or the Smithsonian or commercial entities to build the front-end experiences of those. I'm not sure if anyone's really looked at the behavior that that is affected by using something like that versus a simple wide search.
But you did, I mean, you started with data about how the teachers do use search engines.
No, I was pointing at the mic. 'cause
Oh,
you
sorry.
quiet, yeah.
I'm sorry. I was saying at the beginning of the presentation, you were pointing to data that suggests that educators do use search engines to find
Yeah.
resources they're looking for, you know.
Can you describe what you mean by a serendipitous experience?
I mean, I think yes, I recognize that a lot of educators are coming to doing searches. I need this now. Let me see what I can find with a quick Google search. But this strikes me as an opportunity to say, oh, you searched for this. Well, this isn't exactly what you were searching for, but maybe here's a couple other things that might inspire you or that might broaden what you're looking for or further, alternatively, further refine what you're looking for. So it's almost like, an intelligent search, but something that's really, I think, an opportunity to also expand the ways in which teachers are interacting with resources rather than just saying, we know you're looking for something specific, so I'm going to give that to you as efficient a way as possible. Maybe there's a way to think about it too.
We are looking at that,
Yeah.
and that's a platform.
Yeah, I mean, I think, there's some good examples in our partner on this, the National Museum of American History. Their educator resource pages, the individual sort of landing pages, have some, kind of related resources. They have the primary sources sort of in the, in the column to the right. So I think, with museums especially who are building all these resources, using all the primary resources that we have, all that content, there's a real missed opportunity if that's not happening. And I think there's probably great interfaces that could be designed that would create a more, and I really like the idea of a sort of a serendipitous exploration of related resources and related ideas that sort of connect either across ideas or across themes or.
Like going down a Wikipedia rabbit hole.
Yeah.
But let's keep in mind too that remember the 4 boxes up there, the yellow section is LRMI, right? So we're just tagging it to make it more semantic accessible. The blue portion is the learning registry, which is just distributing that. And then the green portion, which is more to your question, is the interface. And so the interfaces, we've seen a number of different implementations, but clearly there is no perfect method yet. So I think we'll see a lot more exploration and experimentation with that in the future. I think that's about our time.
Yeah.
So it's a good thing you mentioned the semantic web or the semantic approach. This information, this data that you input, how did you manage to keep it meaningful, or perhaps within a data model that is actually truthful? I mean, if I could say truthful, because anybody can input the metadata, and perhaps not meaningful for the search, or perhaps not meaningful for the topic. So usually, if we think of semantic web or linked data, we have an ontology behind that is making sure that the data is correct or at least is meaningful for the search. Because what it seems to me that what we have here, we will have this taxonomy that perhaps is not going to be truthful. I mean, even though the model, the network model is perfect, perhaps the creation of the input, ingestion of the data might not be as accurate as it needs to be. So I don't know if you have anything behind it to make it more accurate.
Unfortunately, we've been told that we have to leave because it's 2:30. But we can answer that outside afterwards.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.